was never just made of bricks and cement. It lives, breathes, and remembers everything that happens within its walls. My name is Aditi, and this is the story of my house, a place that has held both laughter and tears, love and sorrow, secrets and revelations. When I was a child, the house was my entire world, a universe contained within its four walls. The wooden doors creaked like old friends greeting me, and the windows welcomed the morning sun that would gently touch my face. The walls held my laughter as if it were a precious secret, and even the floors remembered the rhythm of my tiny feet. It felt safe, invincible even, as though nothing outside could ever reach me. But time has a way of changing everything, and the same walls that protect you can one day witness your deepest pain. I remember the day it began to change vividly. It was raining heavily. The drops fell relentlessly on the roof, each one sounding like the sky was weeping. I stood by the window, watching the world blur under the downpour, feeling a strange unease that I couldn't understand. My mother was in the kitchen, rolling bread with her gentle hands, humming a soft tune, while my father sat reading the newspaper, occasionally glancing up with a stern face. Everything seemed ordinary, yet my heart sensed a shift, a subtle trembling of the world I had always known to be secure. "Come, eat, child," my mother called softly, her voice warm and comforting like a blanket on a cold winter night. I nodded silently, staring at her with a mixture of confusion and apprehension, sensing that something unspoken lingered in the air. That night, the first real storm of my childhood began inside the house. My father's voice, normally calm, thundered through the walls. "How many times must I tell you? Why do you always argue?" My mother remained silent, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and I, a small child standing in the corner, felt the room shrink around me. For the first time, I understood that storms don't just exist outside. They can rage within the very walls that were supposed to shelter you. As I watched the shadows dance across the dimly lit room, I felt a cold, heavy weight settle over my chest. That night etched itself permanently into my memory, and the meaning of home changed forever. It was no longer just a building. It was a living entity that absorbed emotions, pain, and unspoken words. Over the following weeks, I noticed subtle shifts. The once warm laughter in the hallways became rare, and the echoes of arguments lingered longer, leaving a silence that pressed on everyone inside. I tried to cling to the small joys, a smile from my mother as she cooked, the soft hum of a song my father loved, but even those moments felt fleeting, fragile, as if the house itself had begun to hold its breath. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the rain streak down the glass, I realized that the house had seen generations before me, each with its own set of dreams, hopes, and heartbreaks. And yet, no matter how many stories it held, it was my turn now to leave my mark, to navigate the heartbreak and learn what it truly meant to call this place home. That realization came slowly, through quiet moments of reflection, watching the rain, listening to the silence, and noticing the way the sunlight broke through the clouds to touch the old wooden floors. Every creak, every shadow, every faint scent of past meals and memories reminded me that home is more than just shelter. It is a witness to life, a keeper of secrets, and sometimes the hardest lessons we must learn are taught within its walls. And as I grew, so did my understanding that love, respect, and forgiveness are the bricks that hold a home together, far stronger than wood or stone. That night, though, the house remained still and silent, holding me in its embrace, whispering that the journey had only just begun, and that the lessons I would learn here would shape not just my childhood, but the person I was destined to become. The first crack had appeared, yes, but from that crack would emerge growth, understanding, and a new way of seeing the world. The walls had grown quiet, but my heart had begun to listen, and I knew that this home, my home, would teach me everything I needed to know about life, love, and resilience. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. The house held a tension so subtle yet so heavy that it pressed against every breath I took. Walking through the hallways, I could feel the echoes of the previous storm lingering like ghosts. Each creak of the floorboards, each flicker of light through the curtains, reminded me that nothing in this house was ever truly silent. It merely waited for someone to notice its whispers. My mother moved through the rooms like a shadow of her former self, her smiles rare and fleeting. Yet when they appeared, they were brighter than sunlight, warming the cold corners of my heart. Father spent hours in the study, a silent sentinel among papers and books, as though burying his thoughts within the pages would make them vanish. I tried to speak to him, but the words caught in my throat, unsure whether they would be heard or met with another storm of anger and frustration. School offered a temporary escape, a reprieve from the suffocating quiet. My friends laughed, shared stories, and teased me, but my mind remained half anchored to home. Every mention of family or home life made a weight settle on my chest. I began noticing small details that had always existed but now seemed magnified. The faint scratch on the hallway wall where my brother had once learned to walk, the chipped paint on the door frame that my father had promised to repair, and the faint smell of my mother's cooking that lingered like a gentle reminder of the life that continued despite the cracks in its foundation. One evening, I ventured into the attic again, seeking comfort among the relics of the past. There, behind old trunks and forgotten photographs, I found letters written in my mother's delicate hand, correspondence between her and my grandmother, stories of joy, struggle, and resilience that stretched across generations. The realization struck me with an intensity that made my heart ache. Our house had always been more than walls. It was a keeper of secrets, a witness to lives that began and ended within its confines, each story layering upon the other to create the soul of this home. I spent hours reading the letters, absorbing the lives of those who had walked these floors before me, and in that quiet, I felt a strange connection to the past. I understood for the first time that the present tension in our home was just another chapter in a long lineage of joys, sorrows, misunderstandings, and reconciliations. That night, dinner was quieter than usual. My mother's voice trembled as she asked if I had completed my homework. My father didn't look up, yet I felt his gaze weighing on me, full of unspoken worries. I realized then that silence doesn't always indicate peace. Sometimes it carries the weight of unvoiced truths, of emotions too heavy to express. I retreated to my room early, seeking solace in the comfort of my bed. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracks in the window, rattling the panes softly, like a lullaby for the restless. I closed my eyes and let the memories, the echoes, and the unspoken words wash over me. The house seemed to breathe along with me, its walls absorbing my fears, my reflections, my small victories. And in that moment, I began to understand a crucial truth. A home is not defined by the absence of conflict, but by the presence of love, patience, and resilience. The shadows within these walls were not enemies. They were lessons, gently teaching me how to navigate life, how to hold on to hope even when surrounded by despair. I felt the first stirrings of strength, small yet persistent, like a candle flickering against the dark. That night, the house remained silent, but the silence was no longer suffocating. It was patient, listening, waiting to see how I would grow, how I would learn to turn the cracks in its walls into pathways for understanding, empathy, and love. And as sleep claimed me, I knew that the journey had only just begun, that each day within this house would bring new challenges, insights, and revelations. The walls had stories to tell, and the days grew longer, but the weight in the house remained unchanged. Each morning, sunlight would slip through the curtains, illuminating dust particles that danced lazily in the air. Yet even the warmth of light could not pierce the heaviness lingering in every room. I often found myself wandering aimlessly, tracing the familiar corridors with my fingers grazing the wooden railings, feeling the grooves that had formed over decades, a silent testament to lives that had passed through this home before me. My mother's laughter had become rarer, each smile a fragile bloom in the middle of winter. Father's eyes were tired, lined with worry and exhaustion, carrying the unspoken burdens of adulthood that I could neither understand nor ease. And I, caught between childhood and the dawning awareness of life's complexities, began learning that silence can speak louder than words. It is in the quiet moments that truths reveal themselves. One afternoon, I went to the garden, now overgrown with weeds that my mother had long neglected, and I noticed the resilience of the plants that still stood tall despite the storm, the cold, and the neglect. A realization struck me. Even in the midst of decay and chaos, life persists, and so must we. I spent hours tending to the plants, my small hands digging into the damp soil, feeling an odd connection to the earth, to growth, and to survival. Each sprout, each green leaf, seemed to whisper lessons of patience, endurance, and hope. Inside, the house seemed to shift slightly with every movement I made. The walls no longer pressed down with oppressive silence, but held a sense of watchful expectation, as if they, too, were learning alongside me. At dinner, the air was heavy, but I spoke softly to my parents, asking about their childhood memories, the stories behind old photographs, and the lives of ancestors whose names were barely remembered. Their responses were hesitant at first, but gradually the conversation flowed, weaving fragments of joy, sorrow, and lessons learned into a tapestry of understanding. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the darkened skies and listening to the wind whistle softly through the cracks in the old wood. I realized that solitude is not loneliness, it is a teacher, a mirror reflecting our innermost fears, dreams, and desires. In the quiet of my room, I confronted my insecurities, my longing for love, acceptance, and understanding. The house, in its silent, steady way, held space for all of it, embracing my struggles without judgment. Slowly, I began to comprehend the meaning of resilience, empathy, and patience. The walls had absorbed decades of emotion, and now they seemed to offer guidance, encouraging me to see the unseen lessons embedded in everyday life. And as sleep approached, I felt a subtle strength stirring within me, a quiet determination that tomorrow I would face the house, my family, and myself with renewed courage. For the first time, the silence of the house did not intimidate me. It welcomed me, guiding me toward a deeper understanding of life, love, and the fragile beauty of human connection. I knew that each day would bring new challenges, but also opportunities to grow, to heal, and to weave my own story into the fabric of this home. The journey was far from over, but in the solitude of that night, amidst the shadows and whispers of the past, I discovered a fragment of truth. Even in silence, there is a voice, and even in darkness, there is light waiting to be. The following week brought a strange quiet to the house, a deceptive calm that settled like dust on the furniture. I could feel it in every room, the way shadows lingered longer than they should, and how the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for someone to disturb the uneasy peace. My parents moved through their routines mechanically, their faces etched with silent worries, and I could sense the tension in every gesture, every fleeting glance. One evening, curiosity and a strange sense of courage led me back to the attic, the place that had become my sanctuary. Amid the old trunks and forgotten memories, I discovered a small, dust covered box tied with a faded ribbon. Inside were letters and journals belonging to my father, things he had written long before I was born. I hesitated at first, unsure if I should read them, but the pull of understanding was too strong. As I unfolded the first letter, his words leapt out, raw and honest, revealing fears, regrets, and dreams that he had never voiced aloud. For the first time, I saw my father not just as a disciplinarian or a provider, but as a human being carrying burdens he had never shared. A man shaped by his own childhood, his own heartbreaks, and his own hopes. I read for hours, each letter peeling back layers of the man I thought I knew. His vulnerabilities mirrored my own. And in that reflection, I felt a strange empathy, a growing connection that bridged the silent years between us. That night, dinner was different. The house seemed to breathe with new energy, almost as if it sensed the shifting understanding within me. I spoke softly to my parents about the letters I had found, careful not to sound accusatory, only seeking connection. My father's eyes softened, and for the first time in months, there was a warmth in his gaze that hadn't been there before. My mother smiled faintly, a glimmer of relief breaking through her usual quiet strength. After dinner, I retreated to my room, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the walls were no longer holding only my pain. They had absorbed truths that connected us across generations. Heavier because the responsibility of understanding, forgiving, and moving forward rested squarely on my young shoulders. Yet, in the silence, I began to understand the essence of resilience. Life within these walls would always be complicated, filled with conflict, love, mistakes, and reconciliation. But it was this very complexity that made our home alive, vibrant, and profoundly human. As I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the future, the storms that were yet to come, the misunderstandings that could fracture hearts, and the lessons that would shape us all. And I realized that even though the house had its secrets, its shadows, and its moments of quiet despair, it was also a place of growth, learning, and ultimately love. In that moment, I promised myself to listen more, to understand more, and to be a part of the home's living story, not just an inhabitant. The night deepened, carrying with it a sense of hope and possibility. The walls, once silent witnesses to tension and fear, now seemed to pulse gently with life, encouraging me to embrace the journey ahead with courage, empathy, and patience. And as I drifted into sleep, I knew that the lessons of this house were far from over. Each day would bring new revelations, and each shadow would whisper truths waiting to be discovered. The mornings had begun to feel heavier, each day a slow unfolding of emotions that clung to the walls like morning mist. I walked through the hallways, noticing how familiar the house felt, yet how much had changed in the air around us. Every corner seemed to hold the memory of laughter that no longer echoed, and shadows lingered in spaces that had once been bathed in warmth. My mother moved with quiet grace, her face soft but lined with fatigue, her hands constantly busy, though her eyes sometimes wandered to some distant thought I could not reach. Father's presence was equally paradoxical, firm, silent, yet carrying a weight that seemed unshakable. I began to understand that the house, much like us, bore the scars of unspoken words and unshed tears. I found myself retreating to my favorite window, the one that overlooked the garden, now overgrown and wild. The flowers my mother once tended with care had grown on their own, resilient and stubborn, a small lesson in survival that did not go unnoticed. I often spent hours there, staring at the plants, listening to the wind, and reflecting on how life inside these walls was a mixture of control and surrender. I began writing in my own journal, putting thoughts to paper that had been trapped in my heart for months. The act of writing became a way to connect with the house, to process the tension, and to translate the quiet despair into understanding. Each word, each line seemed to echo back at me, as though the walls themselves were listening, acknowledging, and sometimes responding with an almost imperceptible creak or sigh. One afternoon, as I explored the attic again, I found a forgotten diary belonging to my grandmother. The pages were fragile, yellowed with age, yet the words inside were vivid, telling of a time when the house had been filled with hope and laughter, but also struggles and sacrifices that shaped the generations to follow. Reading her readings, I realized that the pain and the quiet resilience I felt in my own life were part of a continuum, a chain of experiences that the house had silently witnessed for decades. That evening, dinner was quieter than usual, but a subtle shift had begun. Conversations were tentative but warmer, filled with small glimmers of understanding and shared memory. My parents, once distant and burdened, now allowed traces of softness to appear in their gestures, small smiles and quiet reassurances that made the house feel slightly less heavy. As night fell, I sat by my window once more, reflecting on the lessons of the day. I realized that patience was as vital as love, that silence could teach as much as words, and that growth often came through observation, understanding, and the courage to face